me a favor and clear your agree button, your agree tick. Same method as before, little lunatic with his hand up. Just click on the green button again, green tick again, it will go. Thanks Lee, thanks Francesca, thank you Ben, and welcome Tom, just seeing you've joined us as well, welcome. Okay, my name is Mike Murray, Senior Examiner at AQA and General Dogs Buddy for AQA and a few other exam boards. Going to look at some physiology stuff. Currently there's only 4 of us, or 4 of you involved, so we're trying to make it as interactive as possible. If I'm going too fast or too slow, please tell me through the chat window. You have any questions, please just type them in and we'll stop them and we'll ask. I absolutely guarantee if you've got any question, however controversial, simplistic or difficult, it's going to help other people as well, so please feel free to join in. We'll have a break at about 5, see how the thing's panning out. There's a bit more stuff for A2 than there is for AS, so probably just start A2 before we get onto the break. Okay, let's get the show on the road. You should have this presentation printed out. If you haven't, don't worry, you can print it out afterwards. There's also some information I'm going to make available after the presentation through Dropbox, which Graham at Subject Support will let you know about after the presentation. So there's some stuff we're going to refer to that you can find out about after the event. Okay, we're going to do AS first, that seems simple. And we're going to go vaguely through the specification order, which for many people is actually a teaching order. Okay, so look at anatomy. So I don't want to read what it says out there, but the important thing here, if you're delivering the anatomy part of the course, is there are just 7 named actions, and therefore they're the only things you should be teaching. You're not going to get, for example, a diagram of an elbow joint to label. You're not going to get a diagram of various muscles to label. It's going to be detailing the 7 named actions, and those actions, if I can remember rightly, are running, jumping, kicking, squat, tennis, forehand stroke, throwing, and press-ups. So just 7 named actions, and invariably one of those is on the exam board. There's never been, so far, there's never been 2 named actions on the exam paper, and there's never been none either. So it's that sort of idea. So make sure you work with just those 7 named actions. The spec also talks about planes and axes. So that second bullet point is, I think it's quite important, because the vast majority of those movements, the running, the jumping, the kicking, the squats, and to a certain extent the press-ups, are all done in the same plane and axes. And when I'm delivering this rubbish, I tend to only tell the students there is only one plane and one axis that the examiners are likely to ask a question on, and that's the sagittal plane and the transverse axes. So running, jumping, kicking, etc., all the movements take place, all the joint actions take place in the sagittal plane and around the transverse axes. The other movements, the throwing and the tennis racket stuff, and to a certain extent press-ups if your arms are quite wide apart, the plane and axes are very, very difficult to isolate in terms of telling the candidates which actual plane and axes were after as an answer. So I'm not sure that that sort of question would be asked. So if it was me delivering this stuff, I would stick with a single plane and a single axis, which the kids will either get right or wrong. And if they ask about the other planes and axes, but the students I deliver to, which are not the brightest sparks in the world, I wouldn't want to confuse them with other names for other axes and other planes. Personal. It's my personal view. It's not the view of the exam board. Okay, so don't come shouting at me if in the summer exam there's a question about coronal plane and frontal axes. No, I just don't think they will. Third bullet point, delivery. Students don't generally know what happens when someone is running in terms of the leg action. They'll find it quite confusing. I always start with running because I think running seems to summarize most of the actions. And it's quite a good idea to not start off with a YouTube clip of Usain Bolt galloping down, because the students won't pick out what's actually going on with the movements. You might want to find a slow-mo of what's going on when someone's running. You might want to find might want to Google running action or something like that, and get sequences, because that's what's going to happen in the exam. The exam is going to have usually two images, A and B, showing the leg in one position and then the leg in the second position, to show you what's going on with the running action. And don't forget, from the spec, they need to know about hip action, knee action, and ankle action. And they need to know the names of the type of joints. They need to know the types of bones that articulate at those joints. They need to name the main agonists, and just occasionally the main antagonists to the various movements. So I always start off with running, tend to look at the drive phase of running, and almost skip through the recovery phase, because that would be a much more difficult question to ask about the recovery phase. So expect a running sequence with drive phase being highlighted, and essentially then you're looking at the foot in contact with the ground and what happens after that. And usually the foot in contact with the ground has slight flexion at the hip, which goes into extension, possibly even hyperextension, slight flexion at the knee that goes into extension, and ankle joint action is going to be plantar flexion. And that's how I would deliver it, because what happens then when you do jumping, something like a high jump or a long jump, takeoff, it's the same movements being involved. That's how I deliver the stupid thing anyway. And kicking gets very, very good again. Same sort of idea. I've used repeatedly the idea of sticky labels to name the joints, the bones, the muscles, etc. They work very, very well. And it's a repetitive thing, because this topic area is going to be on the exam. There's an expectation it's going to be on the exam, and therefore that sort of delivery. The only one that I would suggest to take care over, there's never ever been a question about the structure of the ankle joint. The reason being, it's quite difficult to actually work out and to tell students. But if you want any help with the ankle is actually a hinge joint. And the two main, it's a modified hinge joint, being clever. The two main movements are plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. And the joint structure is a bit tricky. It has both the lower leg bones, the tibia and the fibula, and they actually rotate around the bone above the heel, which is the talus. The heel is called the calcaneus. The talus is the actual bone that the tibia and fibula articulate with. So just, if you're not sure of that, just be careful with that. So lots of sticky labels, they seem to work as a good idea. And just don't do it once. It's the sort of thing where you can repeat and repeat and repeat. So when they're doing their fitness tests, for example, and they're running through the bleep test, which is a fairly common practical, then you could be asking those students not running to talk about the agonists and antagonists and joints, etc., etc., in that sort of movement. That's how I tend to use reinforcement of this sort of thing. If we teach it quite early, then we can actually show it taking place in other activities and use it as revision. Okay. When it comes to squat, racket actions and throwing and the press up, that's a bit more difficult, and I find, and it's the only thing I do that's not on the spec, I do a practical with the students that involves barbells and dumbbells, but just because my center is mixed, there's boys and there's girls, and I don't want them to do palpation, which is feeling muscles, in legs for obvious